Maybe it's just touchy women. No, I'm just kidding. I'm gonna shut up, that's my point.
All the programs to help prevent drug abuse are similar. They all involve a coordinated effort among family members, teachers, and other school officials. These school-based programs tend to teach life skills, resistance education, and normative education. I actually remember this slide. Normative education aims at correcting erroneous beliefs about the prevalence and acceptability of alcohol and drug use among an individual's peers. Family-focused primary prevention is a necessary adjunct to any school-based program. You have to get the family involved in order for it to take hold. Experimentation, social use, habituation, and abuse usually begins in junior high. 6th, 7th, and 8th grades, that's what junior high is. Because of this proclivity, primary prevention needs to continue while secondary prevention is put in place to deal with those who didn't get the message and started using drugs. School personnel and families should be trained to recognize drug use and how to deal with the consequences of drug use. For those students who begin abusing drugs on a regular basis, treatment must be sought to reduce the probability of a lifetime of abuse. Such a program is the Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports program. It's an adjustment to the environment to reduce the problem. Sometimes it involves taking the child out of the home because that's where they're getting the support to use the drugs. Building general competencies and teaching replacement skills, implementing consequences to promote positive behaviors and deter problems, crisis management or relapse plan. I was talking to an individual a couple days ago, and he was talking about how he needs to maintain his lifestyle so that his grandchildren, he's raising his grandchildren right now, so that his grandchildren will face the right direction and go down the right road. His idea was that if they have livestock to take care of, then they will respect life, and then they will respect their own lives as well. That was his point of view. Really kind of an interesting concept. I hope it works. I guess it's logical. There is a logic to it, but his problem has been that his own children didn't turn out very well. He's got 2 in prison. He's got 1 in rehab out of 5. He has 2 in jail, 1 for murder, which is not happy. Implementing consequences to promote positive behaviors and deter problems, crisis management or relapse plan, and that's a positive behavioral interventions and support program. 1 in 4 children in the United States is exposed to alcohol abuse or dependence in their family. So if we talk to select individuals, everybody in the family drinks. I told you about my brother-in-law, who's Polish. Everybody in his family drank to excess. He had a father that died of alcoholism. He had 1 of his 2 sisters died of alcoholism, and the other one is dying right now of alcoholism. She has alcohol-induced dementia, and she doesn't know anything. His mother was a good Polish mother. If the husband said that it was okay, then she supported it. And for that reason, she didn't teach her children not to drink. What happened with the son, he was headed toward alcoholism. Married my sister. My sister, of course, was raised in my family, where we didn't drink at all. Nobody drank in the family. And she was able to temper his alcohol consumption. The one thing that he has contracted from his drinking days is diabetes. He's got type 2 diabetes, which is kind of unfortunate. But it would be worse if he were as heavy a drinker as his oldest sister, or even his second sister, because both of them, alcohol is killing. Had killed one of them and is killing the other. The one is let me think, how old is she? He is retired from the railroad, and I think he's about 70 years old. So his sister's about 72 years old. She wasn't as heavy a drinker as her other sister, but her other sister died at 43, and his dad died at 39. Kind of sad. But the mother, like a good Polish mother, never said alcohol's bad because her husband was a drinker. And she supported everything that he did. These children will be affected by alcohol even when they don't use it. These children may play different roles in their family. We already talked about this, about being mascots or golden children or whatever. Many alcoholic beverage companies target their advertising toward college. We already talked about this too. Tiffany?
I said maybe.
Okay. Yeah, we already covered all this stuff. This is fun stuff. No wonder. No, I told the same story at the same place. Isn't that funny? Well, that's not
for the day then.
Okay. Guess not. Maybe we should be. Psychoactive substances do have a heavy impact on our college campuses. 1,717 deaths. Now, we already covered this. Yeah. Cleaning up after other people when they get drunk. I was in the service, I didn't drink. I'd be on duty on the weekend. Guess who had to clean up all the vomit? Hated it. I hated it. I don't mind if somebody gets the flu and they throw up, and they vomit, it stinks. It really smells bad. But if they vomit, vodka, oh man. The worst part is they will throw up in the toilet and it splashes out all over the place. Or they'll go over and try to throw up in the wastebasket and miss it. And miss. How do you miss a wastebasket? You got your head in the wastebasket. How in the world did you ever miss? Okay, what are we talking about? Drinking and drug experimentation are seen by some as a rite of passage for college students. However, one approach to the control of college drinking is the normative approach, where the myths of rampant drinking are debunked. 68% of college students thought that their peers... Oh, we already talked about this too. I remember talking about this, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Means of controlling alcohol use, regulate campus. See, the problem is, I normally look this stuff up. But what happened today, Wilson came in. Well, he came in, he's trying to write a speech. And he wanted me to give him some words. Anyway, he came in and he was in there for about 15 minutes. And he kind of threw me off a little bit. Love the man like a brother.
Slide 111.
111? That's
Yeah.
good. Oh, that's right. We got to the pictures, didn't we?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
You love sex and slides, I should say.
Love, sex, and drugs. Okay, here we go. The three main effects of psychoactive drugs on sexual behavior are they increase desire, it increases excitation, and sometimes it increases your orgasmic reaction. They do this by releasing hormones, by affecting blood flow, by affecting blood pressure, by affecting nerve sensitivity, by affecting muscle tension. And of course, they can relax you and make you more likely to accept whatever's happening to you. Some examples of psychoactive interference with normal sexual activity. Heroin desensitizes penile and penile and vaginal nerve endings. Alcohol diminishes spinal reflexes, decreasing sensitivity and erectile ability. So the problem is if you take heroin, the crack whore is possible. A woman can, if she wants to turn tricks, it's possible for her to use crystal meth or to use cocaine or to use amphetamines, and it's possible that that will work. But there's no such thing as a heroin whore, even though it rhymes, because heroin does exactly the opposite. So this individuals after they take heroin, so two people that are taking heroin and then they think they're going to get romantic, it ain't going to happen. because it desensitizes your penis, so it's not going to be as reactive. But it also desensitizes the vaginal nerve ending. So she's not going to be able to have sex. Neither is he. If he's shot up with heroin, he's not going to be able to get an erection, and she's not going to be receptive. So talking about somebody who's a heroin whore, it doesn't fit. It just isn't going to work. And of course, alcohol, especially as you get older, or the more alcohol you consume, the less sensitive that your penis becomes as well. And not only that, but it decreases your testosterone level and increases your estrogen level. So if you look at an old man who's been drinking for 30 or 40 years, sitting at the bar, he probably has breast tissue that is sometimes in a derogatory term they use the man boobs. He probably has breast tissue, and he can't function sexually either because his estrogen level is too high and his testosterone level is too low. And remember, your testosterone is your sex drive. And this guy has just decreased his testosterone by a marked amount. So the probability that he can have sex is fairly remote. There was a movie, who was in that? Nicolas Cage was in it. Anyway, it was about him trying to drink himself to death. And a prostitute decided that she would go with him on his journey to death, I guess. Anyway, so they kept talking, or they kept intimating that these individuals were having a lot of sex. But the reality is, you can't do that if you are an alcoholic, if you drink that much alcohol. It just isn't going to happen. So it was kind of a lie. Sadly, it was a lie. The movie was not true. Can you believe it? They made a movie that was fiction. Death and Dying in Las Vegas, I think was the name of the movie. It had Elizabeth Shue and Nicolas Cage was the guy trying to drink himself to death. And eventually he did. He drank himself to death. And theoretically, she had sex with him just before he died. Theoretically. But that's about as remote a possibility as anything you can imagine. Steroids increase testosterone, making the user more sexually aggressive. Cocaine and amphetamines release dopamine, which mirrors the release of dopamine during orgasm. For that reason, it can enhance sexuality in the beginning. But the more you use, the less sensitive you become to this stuff. And the less sensitive you become, the more aggressive you become. Many drugs affect the hypothalamus, which can trigger unwanted hormonal changes, and sometimes they are negative changes. Chronic drug users combine sex and drugs to lower their inhibitions, to try to make themselves perform better, to increase their fantasies, to shield themselves from their sexuality, to remove themselves from emotional involvement. What was I thinking? Wait a minute. Increase their fantasies. I can't think of what I was thinking. Anyway, okay. Alcohol's effort on sexual function are directly related to the blood alcohol levels. Women may use alcohol to lower their inhibitions, of course, and this is one of the reasons why guys try to get women drunk, so that they can have sex with them. For women, it increases their sexual pleasure because they lower their inhibitions, and whatever is in the way of them having a good time now is no longer in the way, so they may have a better time than they thought they were going to have before. To raise self-esteem and feelings of inadequacy. However, with the increase of alcohol, remember when you drink alcohol, a lot of times people think they can dance. Well, this is another form of dancing. So people think that they can really do a good job at having sex. However, with the increase of alcohol, there is actually a less chance of orgasm. Women are more likely to drink to hide sexual dysfunction than men are. Engaging in sex seems to be something to do while drunk. And of course, some women or some individuals, whatever the relationship may happen to be, that's the only time they do have sex is when they are inebriated. For men, enough alcohol can actually prevent them from being able to have an erection, as it diminishes spinal reflexes, decreasing sensitivity and erectile ability. Alcohol also lowers testosterone levels, while increasing the female hormone estradiol. And of course, we just talked about that. Shakespeare talked about this, the fact that when men are drunk, they think they had a good time, but they probably didn't even perform at all. And of course, I'm not really stating it as Shakespeare would state it, but that's exactly what he was saying. Chronic male drinkers will have a greatly decreased testosterone and a greatly increased estradiol, creating abnormalities in sex steroid metabolism. And of course, that's the man boobs I was talking about. Men like alcohol because it anesthetizes the area of the brain that causes fight, flight, and fear, making them more aggressive. However, it does lower their testosterone, making men more likely to act in an asexual manner. In one study of heavy drinkers, 60% reported being impotent. 60%. And if I were a drinker, that would be too high a percentage for me to even try. Amphetamines and cocaine have always had the reputation of being sexual enhancers, but this is especially true in the gay community because it increases your confidence, it prolongs your erections, it increases endurance, it intensifies orgasms. I think I've talked about this before, but Viagra. Kids are using Viagra now, which makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. If you're a 19-year-old kid, you've got an erection all the time anyway. So why in the world would you ever use Viagra? But they are, and this is one of the reasons that Viagra is such a popular medication, why it's the most popular medication in the world. But individuals that don't have erectile dysfunction are taking this stuff, and of course, they're doing it to prolong their erections. Is why they're doing it, I assume. There may be another reason that I don't understand. I'm an old man, I don't understand these things. You know, kids are doing all kinds of odd things. I don't understand video games either. It doesn't have anything to do with sex, of course, but I just don't understand this stuff. And usually I can find a logic in things, but this one makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. I guess the reality is, I have no idea. I have no idea what's going on. This one is just confuses me beyond my own personal comprehension. It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I don't know what to do. Okay, so what's going on? It increases confidence, it prolongs erections, it increases endurance, it intensifies orgasms, and this is the stimulants that we were talking about before, crystal meth, amphetamines, and cocaine. This is especially true of methamphetamine, which lasts longer in the individual system, so it makes it more likely that that it will affect the sex drive of the individual. It can also intensify the pleasurable feelings that an individual gets from sex. Unfortunately, with continued use in sexual situations, the intensity lessens. So it works the first time, works the second time. By the third time you're not getting the same reaction you were getting before. As dysfunction begins, the individual seeks to use more and more of the drug to achieve normal sexual functioning. Now, all of a sudden, before they were using it to make everything feel better, but all of a sudden they have to use it just to have sex. Now, remember, we're talking about stimulants, and one of the things that stimulants that it will do is it will make you temporarily psychotic. It makes you aggressive, and we see this over and over again. Individuals, they take crystal meth and they murder somebody. And they claim that they blacked out. They didn't even realize what they were doing. So let's put this in a sexual scenario. If we put this in a sexual scenario, one of the things that happens is they become physically aggressive with their sex partner, and potentially they're going to do damage to that select individual. They're going to hurt them, and they're going to blame that person for the fact that they're not responding sexually. Now remember, the drugs are taking away their sex drive. It's going away, and it has to do with them taking the drug. So whose fault is it? Well, if it's a guy taking the drug in order to have sex with the woman, then it must be her fault for not being more exciting so that he will respond properly. I'm talking about the brain of an amphetamine crazed lunatic. Okay? Does all this make sense? So the next thing what's going to happen next? Well, he's going to punish her for not doing whatever it is that he thinks that she needs to do in order to make him have an erection. So all of a sudden we've got damage being done by a select individual. The drug will also intensify pre-existing sexual proclivities. If this is something as harmless as sexual inhibition, it will make the individual more confident. And confidence, everybody loves confidence. If the proclivity is pedophilia or rape, the drug can intensify these behaviors as well. And of course, I told you the story of the young man that got drunk on whiskey, and all of a sudden he raped a young boy. Well, normally he was heterosexual, but when he was inebriated on whiskey, evidently whiskey has some strange power, all of a sudden he became pedophile. And of course then the two families were fighting each other, and one of the families had to leave. Alcohol's effect on sexual function is directly related to the blood alcohol levels. Women may use, I already talked about this. I must have gone the wrong direction. Wait a minute, I already talked about, how in the world did I go all the way that far back? While cocaine may work wonders for men, when first used with prolonged use, the effects may be unintended: delayed ejaculation, decrease in sexual desire, difficulty achieving ejaculation. In women, cocaine may disrupt the menstrual cycle, cause difficulty in achieving orgasm, and decrease desire. I've got a story to tell you, and this is a confession. It's not my confession, it was my ex-wife's confession. When my ex-wife was, she ran away from me, and she went back home, and she started working at a truck stop. This is in the 1970s, and in the 70s, of course, speed was a big thing. So she started dealing speed, pushing speed on the truck drivers, because that's what the truck drivers were looking for. At this time, in the United States, they didn't have laws as to how long you could drive. So some of these guys were driving for 36, 48 hours. And of course there were no laws. Now there are. You have to take 8 hours off every 24 hours. So you can only drive for 16 hours. That's what it is with truck drivers. But back then you could drive as long as you wanted. Speed, of course, was against the law, but here she had a supplier, and the supplier gave her a speed, and she would sell it to the truck drivers. Well, her supplier evidently became enamored with her. He fell in love with her. And they decided to have sex. Well, he took speed before he had sex, and evidently they had a lot of sex for an extended time. That she told me about. Thank you very much. That was an interesting conversation. I really appreciated that conversation. So she comes back and she tells me the story about having sex all the time. And everything was wonderful. Everything was great. So she decided, well, geez, it worked so well the first time. Maybe we should do it again. Well, it turns out that she wasn't the only individual that he was having sex with, and he was doing this with other women. Well, the next time they had sex, this was on down the line somewhere, and he had been having speed-induced sex with other women. So this wasn't the second time he used speed, and there were complications. One of the complications was that she didn't take it this time. That was a complication. The other complication was that he demanded things from her that he didn't want, that he hadn't demanded the first time. Of course, the first time it was like heaven, and rockets were going off, all kinds of interesting things were happening. All of a sudden, but he became aggressive. He started abusing her. And that was part of his foreplay, or what he considered was his foreplay. And eventually, of course, she tried to escape, or she did escape. Actually, he was a little bitty guy. So she ran away, and here she's running around without any pants on, but she had a top on, but she didn't have any pants on. Anyway, and I got to hear the whole story, which is really the story you want to hear when your wife decides to come back. So it was a relatively painful evidently it was painful for both of us. Her for what happened to her, and me because I had to hear the story about what happened to my ex-wife. She wasn't my ex-wife at that time. She was still my wife. I think she was. No, she wasn't. I had divorced her. And she came back. Now you may ask the question, why in the hell did I ever let her come back? Well, it wasn't my idea. She was running away from the cops. They had caught her, and they were trying to get her to turn on her supplier. And of course, he just raped her, in essence. But she didn't turn anyway. She didn't turn on him anyway. So in order for her to, she had to escape. And so what she did, she got my mother to buy her a bus ticket to Texas. I was stationed in Texas. So I didn't really let her come back. It was my mother's fault. The only stupid thing my mother ever did was give my ex-wife a bus ticket to Lubbock, Texas. And so she shows up with like a $10,000 worth of speed, you know, and a whole baggie full of marijuana. It's probably $1,000 worth of speed. So being in the Air Force, of course, if I get caught with any of this stuff, I'm in a lot of trouble. I'll be going to jail for an extended length of time. Here I was a single parent with 2 kids. So what did I do? I took all that stuff and I threw it away. Man, that was the dumbest thing my mother ever did. Okay, so you asked the question, did I let her stay? And the answer is yeah. It wasn't the happiest moment of my life. I certainly heard the worst story that I've ever heard, and now I've admitted to you from my wife. Told me a story, and I still let her stay. It was a horrible, horrible story. In women, cocaine may disrupt the menstrual cycle, may cause difficulty in achieving orgasm, may decrease their desire, and actually that may be what was happening the second time. She wasn't as receptive as she was the first time. And of course, he had been using. Smoking after sex has become a cliche for having had sex. If we see 2 people smoking, they fade out and we don't know what happened next. And then all of a sudden we see both of them smoking cigarettes. We know that they had sex, okay? And this is the old movie cliche. So if you watch old movies, you'll see people smoking. Potentially you can assume that they had sex. In truth, long-term tobacco use is associated with a lower testosterone and erectile dysfunction. In women, it causes reduced fertility, but of course that doesn't have anything to do with sexual response. But of course the lower testosterone and erectile dysfunction does have something to do with sexual response. The opioids are depressants, and so they may act to lower an individual's inhibitions when first used in concert with sex. However, the prolonged use, long-term users report impaired performance and a decrease in sexual drive. In one study, the degree of impotence among men was 39%, jumping to 53% when the individual was actually using the drug. So like I said, the probability of shooting up and then having a good time is almost impossible. Almost impossible. Some of the sedative hypnotics have been touted as sexual enhancers. Benzodiazepines, barbiturates, and quaaludes. The reality is that the individual has lowered inhibitions, which makes it more likely that they will be willing to perform sexually. With prolonged use, the individual begins to suffer from sexual dysfunction and apathy towards sexual stimulation. Select sedative hypnotics have been used as date rape drugs. This is what Bill Cosby is alleged to have used. He used GHB. Rohypnol causes amnesia and lowered inhibitions that makes an individual less likely to resist a sexual assault. GHB lowers inhibition and makes sex more pleasurable. Too much can lead to sleep or even coma. The drug also has amnestic effects. In other words, the reason he's giving this drug to the individual is because they won't remember afterwards what happened to them. One of these drugs makes them pass out. So it's like having sex with a dead person. I think that's GHB. Rohypnol, they're still fairly functional. Marijuana's effects have much to do with the attitude of the individual when smoking, much like LSD. So you can have a bad trip or a good trip. If you're happy before you start smoking, then you'll probably have a fairly pleasant time. If you're unhappy before you start taking, you really can't use marijuana as something that will make you feel better. It doesn't work that way. If you're unhappy when you start smoking marijuana, you're going to stay unhappy. It's not going to make you feel any better. In a pleasant social situation like at a party or on a date, the drug will make people less inhibited and more relaxed, making it more likely that they will do things that they wouldn't normally do. In other words, have sex. Research looking at marijuana in a controlled setting found that the drug inhibited orgasm but not desire. The biggest problem with chronic marijuana use is the user does not learn to have sexual relations without being stoned. And of course, this is a conditioning response. So they have to smoke in order for them, or have to toke in order for them to be able to have sex. MDMA and MDA give their user a warm feeling toward others and induces a heightened sensual awareness. However, the heightened sensual awareness does not enhance the ability to have an erection. As well, orgasms are more difficult to achieve when the individual is using MDMA. Sexual excitement is unlikely when high on the drugs for the men, not for the women. The women can still react in a fairly pleasurable fashion, but of course the male is going to have a difficult time not only having an orgasm, but also getting an erection. If this response is going to occur, it is usually as the person is coming off of the drug. So MDMA can work as a sexual enhancer, but it's at the end of the use of the drug, not at the beginning. So you're not going to drop some MDMA and have a great time. That's not the way it works. You're going to drop some MDMA, and 5 hours later you're going to have a good time, but not right away. Neither PCP or LSD are considered sensual drugs. As an anesthetic, PCP has been used to deaden the pain in select sexual practices in both the gay and the heterosexual communities. So if you have a rapist, one of the things that you can give them to deaden their sexual reaction is PCP. LSD, as a matter of fact, no psychedelics are known as sexual enhancers. And of course, marijuana is one of those psychedelics. Nitrites are used in both the gay and the straight communities as a vasodilator and a muscle relaxer. Users claim that nitrites prolong and enhance orgasmic sensations if used just prior to the orgasm. So you have to pop a capsule just before you have an orgasm. Like Viagra and other erectile dysfunction medications, nitrites act as vasodilators, promoting penile erection. Nitrites also relax the anal sphincter muscles, supporting anal intercourse. And for that reason, of course, that's why it is used in the gay community. But it can also be used in the heterosexual community if an individual wants to have anal intercourse. And that's what my ex-wife, that's what my ex-wife was complaining about, was the fact that this guy tried to have, he did have anal intercourse with her, and it was relatively painful and fairly destructive. And that's really what she was complaining. I know, that's a part that really creeped me out as well. Okay. Psychotropic medications often will interfere with sexual functioning. Tricyclic antidepressants have been linked to decreased desire, problems with erection, and delayed orgasm. SSRIs also caused delayed or inhibited orgasm and impaired erection abilities. Antipsychotics inhibit erectile function. and ejaculation as well as desire. With heavy doses of lithium, desire decreases and individuals report having difficulty maintaining erections. And this is the biggest problem that we have with individuals who are suffering from either a psychosis or depression. The medications that we give them make them fairly sexual non-functioning. And this is one of the reasons why they go off of SSRIs so readily. This is one of the reasons why it's hard to keep somebody who has bipolar disorder or somebody who is psychotic, somebody that has schizophrenia. It's hard for them to stay on their medications. And when we're talking about schizophrenia, they will only stay on their medication for about 6 months out of every year. So it's difficult to keep them on their medication, and this is one of the reasons why. They can't have sex. And of course, it's a natural function, and some people just can't do without it. Aphrodisiacs actually may not exist, though some drugs will enhance sexual situations. The erectile dysfunction medications, Viagra, Cialis, and Levitra, these are the ones that are on the market as we speak. I'm not exactly sure if they've come up with anything else. I haven't seen them on television, so I'm not exactly sure what's going on. And actually, I haven't seen any of these erectile dysfunction commercials on television at all, so I'm not exactly sure what's going on. These allow increased blood flow to the penis, but do nothing for sexual desire. Spanish fly irritates the bladder and the urethra, but it does not actually increase desire. When I was a kid, we used to hear about Spanish fly all the time. It's like if you gave somebody Spanish fly, they would have an erection for an extended period of time, and of course they would want to have sex with everybody. It's known as priapism, but Spanish fly doesn't actually exist. Well, it does exist, but it really doesn't do what they said it would do. Human pheromones increase sexual desire and sexual stimulation, but only select pheromones work on select people. So you have to find the correct pheromones. One of the realities of humans is that we do react to odors, and you have to find somebody who matches your pheromonal level. So if you think about the people that you have been drawn to sexually, potentially that individual, the reason you were drawn to that individual was because of their odor, whether you acknowledged it or not. So potentially that is one of the reasons why. So the reality is that if you have somebody that you think, oh, that person's really gorgeous, I think I want to get with that individual, then you go around them and you go, the chemistry's just not right. Well, what the chemistry that we're talking about is potentially is their odor. They don't have the right, they're not putting off the right pheromones. This is a possibility. I told you the story about the Japanese stewardesses and not reacting at all to these individuals being so close to me. But the reality is that they don't put off pheromones at all. Japanese don't put off pheromones because they have been they've had arranged marriages for centuries, for eons. Yohimbine can enhance blood pressure and heart rate, increasing penile blood flow, but it certainly doesn't do anything for desire. The reality is that we've been looking for an aphrodisiac for an extended length of time. Select things will work, but they only work partially. There is no such thing as a love potion. It just doesn't work. Oh, you know of a love potion that actually does work? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. I wish there was something I could do. But, of course, there isn't. Drugs are often present in cases of sexual assault. 51% of victims reported using drugs or alcohol before the assault. 44% of the assailants used drugs or alcohol before the assault. Irrational or inappropriate desires may occur after alcohol lowers inhibitions and muddles rational thought. I told you about the individual who was heterosexual, but he got drunk on whiskey and he had anal intercourse with a young boy, 12-year-old. He was a 12-year-old boy. Forced him into anal intercourse. irrational and inappropriate desires. Where it came from, nobody was actually sure. But he's lucky that he escaped with his life. And he had to escape to Canada. He took the whole family up to Canada. But it was hit and miss for a while. They were hunting him. The kid's family was hunting him. Stimulants make the user feel more confident and aggressive, making it more likely that a date will be assaulted. Sedatives lower inhibitions, making women more susceptible to assault. Marijuana makes users more suggestible to sexual activity. PCP and heroin make users less sensitive to pain, making it more likely that they will damage their partners during sex. Drug use peaked in the 1980s. Positive drug rates at work were 13.6% in 1988. By 2006, with actually more drug testing, the rate had dipped to 3.8%. When we talk about drugs, people think that, well, everybody's doing drugs in the 70s. Well, the reality was that there were a lot of people doing drugs. Actually, it was in the 80s that all of this was taking place. It didn't have anything to do with the hippies. So what did it have to do with? What was going on? Why so much drugs in the 1980s? What was happening in the United States? It wasn't marijuana. Marijuana use was fairly stable at this point. So what was going on in the 1980s? I was in Omaha at the time. Why was there more drug use in the 1980s?
Maybe more drugs. Maybe more drugs was introduced, maybe?
They were having a really hard time stopping them coming into the country.
Yes.
They were coming up from Colombia. Cocaine. That was cocaine. People in Hollywood started using cocaine. They started writing music about cocaine. And you know how stupid people are. They hear a song and they think, duh, I gotta do it. You know. Somebody rolled a blunt on a bar in Hollywood, so now everybody tries to roll a blunt in Hollywood now. This was cocaine, though. And cocaine's it's a short-acting stimulant. So there were a lot of people that were using it. A lot of wealthy people were using it. And there was a lot coming across the border. And at this point, this was new. Everything was brand new. We had the smuggling of drugs had trickled across the border for years, forever. But all of a sudden, we had mass shipments coming across the border. So we had to shut that down. And of course, we had to want to shut that down. There were a lot of people making money in the United States. And since there were so many people making money, there were a lot of people that were turning a blind eye to the drug trade. And not only that, who were the ones using the drugs? It was the Hollywood stars, it was the wealthy people. So sure, they were turning a blind eye. Of course they were. For money, we'll do just about anything, as sad as that is. So what had to happen was we had to start seeing people dying, and that's exactly what happened. The cartels started murdering people on the open seas and seizing their yachts and using the yachts to smuggle drugs into the United States. And it happened to President Reagan's, one of President Reagan's friends. And after that, man, he turned the military on to, he released the Air Force to start stopping flights coming into the United States. And they shot them down. They just shot them down. If they were over the ocean or the Caribbean. They shot them down. They didn't mess around. And we started using our radar. We've got a plane that can see for 250 miles in a 250-mile radius. And they were flying these flights all over South America. We were just killing them. And we were burning their cocaine factories in Colombia. So everything changed. I mean, it was really kind of bizarre. So it had to do with wealthy people. It had to do with famous people using cocaine. And that's why the cocaine use was so high. I was working in Omaha, as I said, and part of that time I was working in a children's hospital. And that's when I saw all the babies that were born who were addicted to cocaine. The babies that were born with all kinds of odd deformities because cocaine really screws up a fetus. Anyway, okay, so that's what was going on. Thank you. The lower drug use levels at work may be due as much to drug users avoiding companies that drug test as drug usage at work declining. Estimates are that 8.2% of all the workers use illegal drugs in the United States. 8.4% of full-time workers are heavy alcohol users. And of course, we don't test for alcohol. We're only testing for illegal drugs like cocaine. Now we can test for marijuana. This is one of the jobs I had when I was in the service. I was a narc. One of my jobs was collecting drug urines, as I told you before, but we couldn't test for marijuana. We could only test for opiates, barbiturates, and amphetamines. They're the only things we could test for. But we couldn't test for marijuana. Anyway, all my best stories have to do with drugs, so it's kind of fun. Contrary to the image of the addicts skulking around alleys to support their drug habit, 74.8% of addicts over 18 are employed as full-time or part-time employees. 80% of binge drinkers are employed. So it's not the town drunk that is the drinker, it's the whole damn town are the drinkers. But most people have a job and they drink in the sanctity of their own homes. 62% of the people diagnosed with substance abuse disorders were employed. Unfortunately, substance abusing employees do not make good employees. They are late 3 to 14 times more often. They are absent 5 to 7 times more often. They make more mistakes than other employees. They tend to have a lower output. They are more likely to appear in a greater number of grievance hearings. They are 3 to 4 times more likely to have an accident on the job. They are use 3 times more sick leave. They file for workers' compensation 5 times more frequently. They overutilize health insurance along with their families. They cause premiums to increase for medical insurance. They endanger the health and well-being of their coworkers. And that is a point of fact. What did I was telling students yesterday? Oh, I haven't had a sick day since 1975. I know. It's just no fair. Other people get to take off for having a cold or getting the flu. I never get sick. That's in that coffee. I never get a damn day off. I mean, it's just not fair. If I get a day off, everybody else gets a day off the same damn day. And other people, geez, Sue was out for a whole week a couple of weeks ago. That's not fair. She's already had more sick days in she's only been here for 3 months. She's had more sick days in those 3 months than I've had since 1975. And this thinks it's funny. It's not funny, it's sad. You know what's really sad? Since I'm such a good employee and I work every damn day and I get sick days, right? You get so many sick days on a year, they don't pay you for sick days. You can't get them back. That's just not fair. They ought to pay us for being good employees and never missing a day of work. Don't you agree? Let's start a petition. Okay. What's that? No. No place I've ever worked would pay me for my sick days that I didn't use. Ugh. The most common drug found in employees samples, marijuana 48.8%, cocaine 16.4%, amphetamines 9.3%, opiates 6.7%, benzodiazepines 5.4%. As I said, we don't check for alcohol when we're doing drug testing. 26% of the people tested for cause tested positive. The area of the country that was the most likely to have positive drug tests was in the rural South. Those bastards, they're the ones carrying guns, and they're the ones that are drunk and disorderly. Just isn't that perfect? Employee assistance programs are programs established to help employees become better employees by providing treatment and counseling when needed. 45% of all employees in the United States are covered by EAPs. 70% of all employees working for organizations with more than 500 employees are covered by EAPs. So if you have a drinking problem, potentially you can get help. They do work. Northrop saw a 43% increase in production from the first 100 employees they sent to an alcohol treatment program. Employees of the Philadelphia Police Department who went through treatment reduced their sick days by 38% and their injury days by 62%. Providing EAPs for their employees at the Oldsmobile plant in Lansing, Michigan reduced their lost work hours by 49%, healthcare claims by 29%, sick leaves by 56%, grievances by 78%, disciplinary problems by 63%, and accidents by 82%. Okay, let's look at this for a second. This is the car that you drive. This is the people that are supposed to be protecting you, the police. This is the airplane you jump in and fly to Rome in. Okay? So it's really important that these people are improving their work skills by going to treatment. I appreciate the fact that that is what has happened. Oldsmobile, of course, no longer exists. The plant still exists. They're building Chevys there, but the Oldsmobile brand has gone to the way of the dodo bird. There are several types of EAPs based on financial needs. Internal in-house programs are found in large companies who can afford the expense. Fixed fee contracts, the company contracts at a set fee for any program needed. Fee for service contracts, the company contracts with an outside EAP on an as-need basis. Consortia, smaller employers get together to contract with an outside EAP service. Peer-based programs, peers and coworkers provide the needed services. The military has been at the forefront of drug testing since the war in Vietnam. And of course, this is when I started doing drug testing. I was in a class in 1971. We graduated in 1972. They were ramping up all of the drug testing in the United States military. 3/4 of the people that I graduated from lab school with went into drug testing. As fascinating as that is. And they all went to Brooks Air Force Base and to do drug testing. And so what was my job? My job was to collect them urine so that I could send it in and they could test it. In the late 1970s, drug testing in Europe peaked at 1 in 3 soldiers testing positive for illicit drugs. When I was stationed in Europe, they did the drug testing that we did. 1/3 of all the drugs, all of the people that were tested positive. Now the sad thing about that is, we still couldn't test for marijuana at the end of the 1970s. So all of these people that were testing positive were either testing positive for opioids, amphetamines, or barbiturates. That's all we could test for. And 1/3 of the people in the military in Europe tested positive. In the 1980s, 27.6% of the soldiers in the military tested positive for illicit drugs. This was during the drawdown. We were drawing down from Vietnam. We still had a lot of individuals that were stuck on drugs from Vietnam. By 1998, the level of illicit drug use in the military had dropped to 2.7%. And I can assure you that this is accurate. And the reason I can assure you that it's accurate is because we used random sampling. We tested and we tested everybody for what we tested them for. So I know that this is accurate, and I also know that this is accurate. So we literally went down from 27.6% to 2.7%. As I told you, individuals, when I was collecting their drug urine, some people would offer me money. But of course I never took any. Maybe I'm stupid. All right, I'm stupid, all right, but at least I'm honest, and maybe, yeah, okay. In 2005, the level had been cut by more than 100% to 1.11%. And the reason it's been cut so low is because when they found somebody on drugs, they gave them a choice. They either went to treatment or they kicked them out of the service. So we got rid of all the bad apples. We got rid of all the Vietnam vets that they couldn't handle coming back to the States. We got rid of all those individuals that needed to take drugs because they found killing exciting. All those individuals left the service. They had to leave the service. Of course, we are still not testing for alcohol. We're only testing for the harder drugs. Marijuana. Now we can test for marijuana. We started testing for marijuana actually in the 1990s. So this figure has to do with marijuana as well. Intense drug testing can be credited for the success. Everybody knew that it was random. We did it by social security number. We did it by the last two numbers of their social security number. So sometimes we would select a number on a base. We'd select two numbers. And sometimes we get like 5 people coming in for random sampling. And sometimes we get 150 people coming in for random testing. And we had to test them within 24 hours. They would be ordered to appear. Sometimes the base commander would have to collect the drug urine specimen. Because that's how random it was. And it just had to do with their last two numbers of their social security number. Wasn't my proudest moment in the service, but somebody had to do it. And the reason, and I told you before, the reason I got to do it was because 1, I was a laboratory technician, and 2, I was over the age of 21. And you can only sign a legal document, that kind of a legal document, if you're over the age of 21. And so that was me. The rest of the people, most of the other people were in their 19s and their teens and early 20s, so I got to do it. The military has maintained a reputation for heavy drinking since its inception. It wasn't until after Vietnam and the drug movement, control movement, that the military began concentrating on curbing instead of promoting alcohol use. As I told you before, I made NCO. When I made NCO, I had to join the NCO club. And if you joined the NCO club, every time you went into the building, you had to buy 2 drinks. That was the rule. So most people would go, when they went to the NCO club, would buy 2 drinks, and they drank 2 beers. Or they drink 2 shots of whiskey, or whatever it was that they were drinking. Well, I didn't drink. So what the hell am I going to do? Well, they wanted my money. They just wanted it. And I complained. And I was ordered I had to be a member of the NCO club if I was an NCO, and I had to follow their rules. So I got into a lot of trouble. So I complained about it. I complained about it to my congressman. And things changed. Well, things changed really slowly. First of all, they said, well, we don't care if you're a member of the club. You're an asshole anyway. We don't care if you're a member of the club. And they literally referred to me in really negative terms because I didn't drink. Eventually, they changed the rules. But it took years, and by that time, of course, I was out of the service. They threatened to kick me out of the service because I wouldn't drink. This is in the middle 70s. As stupid as that is. I'm a single parent, and they want me to get drunk at the NCO club. Sure they do, because all they cared about was the revenue. It's money. Every time it's money. Okay, so it was after Vietnam, and of course, they were drawing down the Corps at the time. They were kicking people out of the service. They were kicking them out for all kinds of different reasons. They had too many of these people. They had too many captains, so they're kicking all these captains out. They were just looking for excuses to get rid of people, and drugs were one of the excuses that they used. So they got rid of a lot of problem people. Then they decided that they were going to look at alcohol, and so they started kicking people out for heavy drinking in the military. In 1980, the level of heavy drinking in the military was 20.8%. By 1998, the level had been cut to 15.4%. At present, the level has increased to 17.1%, higher than the general public at 12%. But of course, so why do military people drink so much? What's wrong with military guys? What's going on? Why do they have to drink? My wife was stationed in Japan. They were flying combat missions. They were simulating combat missions. They had one guy that was taking off and another guy that was landing. Unfortunately, they were in the same place. And so the guy that was landed on top, pancaked on top of the guy that was taking off. And of course, wrecked both planes. Killed the guys underneath. There were two guys. There was a pilot and a weapons engineer, the guy that actually fired the weapons. So those two guys were killed. That night, guess what happened at the NCO club, or the O club, on base. This is in the South. They had a big party. Everybody got drunk. Why? Well, they were trying to forget the fact, they were celebrating the fact that these people lived and died the way they wanted to, but they were also celebrating the fact that tomorrow it may be me. So everybody got drunk. And the next day they called off all the missions, but then the next day they flew the missions again. And everybody was okay. There's a lot of testosterone that is involved in being in the military. Just holding a gun will raise your testosterone level. Loading rockets onto an airplane will raise your testosterone level. So there's a lot of increased testosterone level. And with that increased testosterone comes a way to dissipate that testosterone, and the way they do it in the military is to drink. It's not as bad as it has been in the past, but it's still pretty bad. My wife used to go to formal parties. They would have formal parties where they dressed up in all their fancy, like tuxedo-like outfits. And they would do things like they would take a toilet and they'd fill it up with whatever extra stuff they had at the back of the bar. And all these alcoholic beverages that nobody drinks, vermouth and stuff like that. They'd pour it all together into the grog bowl. And if you did something wrong during the party, then you had to go to the grog bowl and drink it wasn't a shot, it was like a triple shot of this stuff. And it's all pure alcohol. It's got all this horrible flavoring in it. They had a game called Dead Bug, where somebody would yell "Dead Bug," and everybody had to lay on the ground and act like a bug that was dying. They would throw their hands and feet in the air and pretend that they were dying. The last person to get on the floor, see, they were in their really fancy uniforms, right? And it costs a lot of money to get these things dry clean. And here these people are jumping on the ground, and they were waving their arms and legs in the air. If you were the last one, or didn't get off of your chair to play Dead Bug, then you had to go to the grog bowl and take one of those triple shots of whatever it was in the grog bowl. By the end of the evening, that grog bowl would be empty. It was a toilet bowl that was full of alcohol. And by the end of the night, somebody had gotten all the way to the bottom. Hopefully it was a clean toilet bowl. We'll pretend it was. Anyway, that's the military. Sounds delightful, doesn't it? Or drink out of the toilet. I only went to one of those, they're called dining in, is what they're called. I only went to one of them while my wife was in the service. And I got her in trouble. I thought it was stupid. I thought all these were stupid games that idiot officers, see, I was linguistic, that officers did. So she had to go to the grog bowl over and over and over again for me. And boy, was she ever drunk by the end of the night. She was a mess. And it was my fault. I couldn't leave. If you left, then, they had to go to the grog bowl and drink 2 or 3 drinks. It was terrible. It was ridiculous. It was a stupid game that military people play, but it's because of all this testosterone that's splashing around. The highest rate of alcohol abuse in the military is in the Marine Corps branch. There's a shock for you. If you know anything about the Marines, if you're in other branches of the service, the Navy, the Army, the Air Force, then you live with your family. Unless you're on a ship, of course you're out on the ocean, you don't take your family with you. But when you're in port, you live with your family. Same way with the Army, same way with the Air Force. It's one of the reasons why the Air Force is the best branch of service, because you go to work every day and then you go home to your family. And usually your base, even if in a combat situation, your base is away from all the fighting. They fly to the fighting. But you need to put it someplace where the enemy can't get to it. So it's a fairly safe branch of the service. The Marines, on the other hand, they live in a dormitory. They all live together. And they only go home whenever they can get a pass. So the Marines don't actually live with their families. They live with the rest of the Marines. And that may have something to do with the fact that at night, when they have time off, and they can't go home to their families, they go to the NCO club or the officers club and drink. So they have the highest alcoholism rate in the military. The lowest level of alcohol abuse is in the Air Force, with the other three branches of the military, the Army, Navy, and the Coast Guard, somewhere in between. The Air Force is, as far as alcoholism is concerned, the Air Force has the lowest and the Marine Corps has the highest. The Air Force was the first branch of the service to crack down on drug and alcohol abuse, and they have been at the forefront of the drug and alcohol abuse among the services. And this is because the Air Force is flying airplanes. And when you're flying airplanes, especially if you're flying nuclear weapons, you don't want a drunk pilot crashing his airplane and exploding the ordnance, whatever the ordnance is. The first military EAP was the Air Force's Alcohol and Drug Abuse Prevention and Treatment Program. The reason that they started this in the Air Force is because of the pilots. They didn't care about the enlisted personnel but they spent all this money training these pilots, and now they needed to get their money's worth out of these pilots. So they started an EAP program. They tried to get them to slow down on their drinking, not using any drugs, certainly not using any drugs. So the Air Force was the first. The Army soon followed with the Army Substance Abuse Program, and the Navy's Navy Alcohol and Drug Abuse Prevention Program came next. Of course, the Marines are in with the Navy. One of the things that happened was that the reason that the Army was soon after the Air Force's program was because the Air Force started publicizing the fact that they had this program. The Congress wanted to know, well, if these guys are sober, why shouldn't the Army be sober, and why shouldn't the Navy be sober? And of course, they had to start those programs after that, despite the fact they had it was an environment of drinking. It was hard drinking. If you talk to people from World War II, they stayed inebriated. Whenever they weren't in combat, they were drunk. If you look at Vietnam, they were stoned. Whenever they weren't in a dangerous situation, they came back and they just got snockered, one way or the other. Anyway, of course, now the military is completely changed. The military's programs have been so successful because the military has almost absolute power over all military personnel. I told you about the story about the individual that we ordered not to have sex. Now, how in the world can you do that? Well, military people, they're yours 24/7. They belong to you. They belong to their unit. So you can tell them what to do. You can order somebody not to be prejudiced. I don't want to see that behavior again. And if I do, then you're going to be written up, or we're going to kick you out of the service. And you can do that in the military. Now, normally you can't order somebody to do something. They can do whatever they want to do. But in the military, they belong to the military every second of every day. And you can order them not to do things. And this is the reason, and I think I've told you the story about my wife stabbing me. When she stabbed me, one of the reasons I didn't go to the emergency room was because I would have gotten in trouble. She stabbed me and I would have gotten in trouble because I was the military man. And I wasn't controlling my wife. Now, the military has no control over her, but they have control over me. So they can't punish her, but they would have punished me. And it would have been my fault, and I would have gotten my stripes taken away if I had gone into the emergency room or called the police. What would have happened to her? They would have just kicked her off base. They would have just kicked her off base. It was on base and she stabbed me. Weird. Why don't we stop right? We have to stop right here. Next week I will try to finish this chapter, and we'll start talking about pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals are very, very important because this is the stuff you're going to be dealing with if you get into counseling. You're going to have people coming in and say, "Well, doctor gave me Klonopin." And you're going to be going, "Oh, Klonopin? What the hell is that?" Okay, let me look it up. Anyway, so we're going to talk about pharmaceuticals next week. So I'll see you guys later, I guess. Or tomorrow.